Paul was a remarkable man. He saw things, he heard things, he went places, he had experiences most of us can only dream about. He was caught up to the third heaven, he said. He heard things that are not lawful for a person to utter. He had direct visions from Jesus. He walked with God in a way that truly sets him apart. And yet, Paul also talked about a thorn in the flesh. It's a famous phrase. And it's a puzzling one. People have wondered for centuries what exactly this thorn was. The Bible doesn't tell us plainly. And maybe that's the point. It leaves it open for all of us to relate to. But Paul was clear about one thing. It was a big deal for him. It was a constant struggle. And he desperately wanted it gone. He prayed about it. He really poured his heart out to God. 3 times, he says, he begged the Lord to take it away. He was an apostle, a man who healed others, who saw miracles happen through his hands. You'd think God would just snap his fingers and remove whatever was bothering Paul. But God's answer was different. It wasn't the answer Paul expected. It wasn't, eyes, I'll take it away. It was something else entirely, something profound, something that teaches us a lot about how God works in our lives. So let's talk about this thorn in the flesh. What was it? And what did God actually say to Paul about it? We find the main part of the story in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul is actually defending his apostleship there. He's had to deal with a lot of critics. They challenged his authority. They questioned his experiences. So he starts talking about these incredible visions and revelations he received from the Lord. He even boasts a bit, but then he quickly turns it around. He knows that too much pride, even in spiritual experiences, can be dangerous. That's where the thorn comes in. Paul says, "And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure." Let's unpack that a little. Lest I should be exalted above measure. This is a key phrase. Paul was given amazing insights. He saw things no other person had seen. He was entrusted with the gospel message in a unique way. It would be very easy for someone in that position to become arrogant, to think they were special, to start relying on their own spiritual greatness. God knew this. God knows us. He knows how prone we are to pride. So, this thorn was given to him, Paul says, to keep him humble, to keep his feet on the ground, to keep him from getting a big head. Then he describes it, a thorn in the flesh. What does that image bring to mind? A thorn isn't just a little prick. It's something sharp, something painful, something that sticks in you. It's irritating. It's constant. It's hard to get rid of. It causes discomfort. It causes a wound that keeps getting reopened. It implies something persistent and annoying, not just a one-time problem. It implies something that's always there causing distress. It's in the flesh, meaning it's personal. It's tangible in some way. It's part of his human experience. And then Paul adds another layer, the messenger of Satan to buffet me. This is big. This isn't just a random problem. Paul sees it as having a spiritual source. It's a messenger of Satan. That means it's an attack. It's something designed to cause him trouble. To buffet means to strike repeatedly, to punch, to beat. It's a violent image. It suggests a constant, relentless assault. This wasn't a passive annoyance. It was an active, aggressive problem. It wasn't just a slight inconvenience. It was a powerful force working against him. So, Paul, this amazing apostle, this man of God, is dealing with something painful, persistent, and directly from Satan, designed to humble him, but also to harm him. That's a lot to carry. And like any normal person dealing with a serious problem, Paul prayed. He prayed hard. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. 3 times. That's not just a casual prayer. That's earnest, focused, desperate prayer. He wasn't just saying, Lord, please fix this. He was probably fasting. He was probably agonizing over it. He was a man who knew how to pray, and he put all his spiritual energy into asking God to remove this thorn. He expected God to say yes. He believed in a God who could heal, who could deliver. And he was certain God would take this problem away. He asked not once, but 3 times, just like Jesus prayed in Gethsemane. It shows the depth of his desire for relief. Now, what was it? That's the question that has fascinated people for centuries. The Bible doesn't say. And it's probably for a good reason. If Paul had said, my thorn was chronic migraines, then everyone who didn't have chronic migraines might think, oh, that passage isn't for me. But because it's left general, a thorn in the flesh, it applies to all kinds of struggles we face. It becomes universal. But let's explore some of the common ideas people have had about what Paul's thorn might have been. It's helpful to consider the possibilities, not to find the definitive answer, but to understand the breadth of what a thorn in the flesh could mean. One of the most popular theories is that it was a physical ailment. Paul traveled constantly. He went through immense physical hardship. He was beaten, shipwrecked, stoned, hungry, sleepless. His body probably took a toll. Many scholars think it might have been an eye problem. We find some clues in his letters. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 13-15, Paul reminds the Galatians, "You know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. And my temptation which was in my flesh ye despised not, nor rejected, but received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. Where is then the blessedness ye spake of? For I bear you record, that, if it had been possible, ye would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me." This is a strong hint. He says his infirmity of the flesh was such that they would have plucked out their own eyes for him. That sounds like a severe eye condition, maybe an infection or something that caused a lot of pain and disfigurement. Then, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 11, Paul writes, "Ye see how large a letter I have written unto you with mine own hand." Some interpret this to mean he had poor eyesight and had to write in large letters. Or others think he was just emphasizing how much he cared by writing the whole letter himself. But combined with the earlier verse, the eye problem theory gets a lot of traction. Imagine trying to preach and travel in the ancient world with a severe eye condition. The sun, the dust, the lack of medical care, it would be incredibly debilitating. It would certainly humble you. It would make you dependent on others, and it could easily be described as a constant, buffeting pain. Another physical theory is a chronic disease like malaria. The region Paul traveled in was known for malaria. Malaria causes recurring fevers, chills, headaches, and weakness. It could come and go, but always return. It would make ministry incredibly difficult. A sudden bout of malaria could strike Paul down during a crucial preaching engagement. This would certainly be a messenger of Satan to buffet me. It would be humiliating to be so weak and ill when trying to proclaim a powerful message. Some have suggested epilepsy. In ancient times, seizures were often associated with spiritual attacks or demonic possession. If Paul, a powerful apostle, suffered from seizures, it would certainly be a source of humiliation and could be seen as a buffeting. It might make some people question his authority or divine connection. His physical presence might be seen as weak. Then there's the idea of a speech impediment. In 2 Corinthians 10:10, Paul's opponents say of him, "For his letters, say they, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible." This might just be an insult, but it could also point to an actual issue. If Paul struggled with public speaking, perhaps he stammered or had an uncommanding voice, it would be a constant thorn for an evangelist whose primary job was to preach. This would certainly make him feel weak and humble. Any of these physical problems would fit the description of a persistent, painful, and humiliating affliction. They would make Paul rely on God's strength, not his own. But what if it wasn't a physical problem? What if it was a spiritual or emotional burden? Paul constantly faced immense opposition and persecution. From the moment he became a Christian, he was a target. Jewish leaders hated him, and Roman authorities imprisoned him. False teachers undermined him. He was relentlessly pursued and slandered. He describes this in great detail in 2 Corinthians 11, talking about beatings, imprisonments, dangers from his own countrymen, dangers in the wilderness, dangers from false brethren. Could this constant barrage of opposition be his thorn? It was certainly a messenger of Satan meant to stop his ministry. It was a constant buffeting. It never let up. This kind of external pressure, though not internal to his body, could easily be described as a thorn in his flesh, in the sense of his human experience. It would certainly keep him humble, as he experienced constant rejection and suffering despite his divine calling. Another possibility is distress over the churches. Paul carried a heavy burden for the congregations he planted. In 2 Corinthians 11:28, he says, "Beside those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches." He worried about their faith. He grieved over their divisions and their sins. He fought against false teachings. This deep emotional and spiritual burden could be a constant source of pain. The spiritual warfare against the churches, the attacks of false teachers, could be seen as messengers of Satan, buffeting him through the troubles of his beloved congregations. This would certainly be a humbling experience, to see his hard work sometimes undone by human failing or demonic influence. Some people even suggest it was a persistent temptation to sin. While Paul was a righteous man, he was still human. He knew the struggle against the flesh. In Romans 7, he talks about doing the very things he doesn't want to do. Could there have been a particular sin that continually tempted him, perhaps pride or anger or lust, which he constantly had to fight against? If so, this would truly be a thorn in the flesh, a constant reminder of his fallen human nature. However, it's less likely to be a messenger of Satan to buffet me lest I should be exalted, as Paul seems to present it as an external affliction rather than an internal sin struggle, though the lines can blur. It's important to remember that all of these are theories. The Bible doesn't give a clear answer. And that's often how God works. He leaves some things a mystery, not to frustrate us, but to broaden the application. This passage isn't just for someone with bad eyesight, it's for anyone dealing with a chronic illness, a relentless enemy, a constant struggle, a deep emotional pain, or a spiritual attack. Everyone has some kind of thorn in the flesh. It's a universal human experience to deal with unwanted, persistent trouble. But the real core of the passage isn't about what the thorn was, it's about God's answer to Paul's prayer. This is where the profound lesson lies. Paul pleaded 3 times for it to be removed, and God said, no, not directly, no, but something much richer and deeper. God's answer to Paul was, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Let's really think about that. Paul wanted the thorn gone. God offered him something else, grace. My grace is sufficient for you. What is grace? It's God's unmerited favor. It's his kindness toward us, even when we don't deserve it. But in this context, it's more than just forgiveness. It's also God's enabling power. It's the spiritual strength, the divine help, the sustaining presence of God that allows us to endure, to cope, to even thrive in the midst of our struggles. It's not just that God forgives us, it's that God helps us. He gives us what we need. And this grace, God says, is sufficient. That means it's enough. It's completely adequate. It's all Paul needed. He didn't need the thorn removed. He needed God's grace. And God promised that his grace would be more than enough to handle whatever the thorn threw at him. This is a profound truth. We often think we need our circumstances to change for us to be okay. God says, no, you just need me. My grace is enough. Then comes the paradox, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. This is one of the most powerful statements in the Bible. It's completely counterintuitive to human thinking. We value strength. We want to be powerful. We want to be independent. We want to overcome our weakness. We see weakness as a problem to be solved, a flaw to be hidden. But God says, no, your weakness is actually the perfect stage for my strength to shine. How does that work? When Paul was strong, when he was eloquent, when he was self-sufficient, he might have been tempted to take credit for his ministry. People might have said, look at Paul, he's so amazing. But when Paul was weak, whether through illness or persecution or some other struggle, then it became obvious that any success he had was not because of him, because of God. God's power would flow through his weakness. God's strength would be demonstrated in his inability. Think about it. If Paul preached a powerful sermon while suffering from excruciating pain or poor eyesight, who would get the glory? Not Paul's health or his natural abilities, but God's power working through a broken vessel. If he continued his ministry despite constant opposition, it showed that God was with him, not that Paul was a master of self-defense. His weakness prevented him from boasting in himself and forced him to rely completely on God. And when he relied completely on God, God's strength was fully displayed. This is a beautiful truth. Our weaknesses, the very things we want to hide or get rid of, can become the avenues through which God's power is most clearly seen. They strip away our self-reliance and force us into a deeper dependence on God. And that dependence is where true spiritual strength comes from. Paul's response to God's answer is equally telling. He didn't get angry, he didn't give up, he didn't say, well, if God won't remove it, I'll just have to deal with it. Instead, he radically changed his perspective. He says, most gladly therefore will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then am I strong. This is an astonishing statement. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, or glory in his weaknesses. Take pleasure in them. This is not a normal human reaction. This is a divine perspective. Paul chose to embrace his weakness. He didn't just tolerate it, he found a way to celebrate it. Why? That the power of Christ may rest upon me. He understood that his weakness was the conduit for God's power. He saw his struggles not as hindrances, but as opportunities for Christ to show up and show off his strength. He then broadens the scope of his infirmities. He lists reproaches, insults, dishonor, necessities, hardships, deprivations, persecutions, being hounded and harassed, and distresses, difficult situations, anguish. Well, he takes pleasure in all of these. For Christ's sake. It's all about Jesus. It's all for the advancement of the gospel. It's all to glorify God. And he wraps it up with that powerful, unforgettable phrase, for when I am weak, then am I strong. This isn't just a clever saying. It's a fundamental principle of the Christian life. Our human strength, our abilities, our achievements can often get in the way of God's work. They can foster pride. They can lead us to believe we don't need God as much as we do. But our weaknesses, our limitations, our failures, our chronic struggles, our brokenness, These are the very things that push us into God's arms. They remind us that we cannot do it alone. They create a vacuum that only God's strength can fill. So the thorn in the flesh was a significant, persistent, and probably painful affliction for Paul. It was given to him by God, using Satan as a messenger, to keep him humble in the face of incredible spiritual experiences. Paul desperately prayed for its removal, but God said no to removal and ease to grace and strength through the weakness. Paul then embraced this truth, finding joy and strength in his infirmities because they were a platform for Christ's power. Now, what does this mean for us today? Because honestly, everyone has a thorn in the flesh of some kind. Maybe it's a chronic illness, maybe it's a mental health struggle like anxiety or depression, maybe it's a difficult relationship that never seems to get better, maybe it's a financial struggle that just won't go away. Maybe it's a personality trait that constantly causes problems for you. Maybe it's a spiritual battle, a persistent temptation, or an ongoing attack from the enemy. The first lesson is that suffering is not always a sign of sin. Paul was one of the most righteous people to ever live, a faithful apostle, and yet he had a thorn. This is a crucial point. We often think, if I'm struggling, it must be because I've done something wrong. While sometimes our struggles are a consequence of our choices, often they are not. They are simply part of life in a fallen world, or even, as in Paul's case, a specific tool God uses for a higher purpose. And God allowed Paul to suffer, not as punishment, but as a means to keep him humble and to display divine power. So if you're struggling, don't immediately assume it's your fault. The second big lesson is that God doesn't always remove the problem. This is a hard truth to accept in a world that promises instant fixes and quick relief. We pray, just like Paul did, for our pain to go away, for our burden to be lifted, for our problem to disappear. And sometimes God does answer that prayer with a miraculous removal. But sometimes, like with Paul, God's answer is to give us the strength to live with the problem. He gives us his grace to endure. He gives us his power to carry on, even when the thorn remains. It's not the answer we want, but it's often the answer we need. This means we need to shift our perspective on prayer. When we pray for something to be removed and it isn't, it doesn't mean God didn't hear us. It doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means he has a different plan, and that plan involves his grace being sufficient and his strength being made perfect in our weakness. Sometimes, the most powerful answer to prayer is, my grace is enough. The third lesson is about finding strength in weakness. This is the core message. Our culture tells us to be strong, to be self-sufficient, to overcome our weaknesses. But God's way is often the opposite. When we are at our weakest, when we admit we can't do it, when we are truly dependent on God, that's when his power is unleashed in our lives. Our vulnerabilities become platforms for God's glory. Our limitations become opportunities for God to demonstrate his limitlessness. Think about what this means practically. If you are struggling with a chronic illness and you have to rely on others or on God for daily strength, that very reliance can be where God's power shines. People might see your enduring spirit, not as your own strength, but as God working through you. If you struggle with anxiety and you have to constantly cast your cares on God, that ongoing act of faith, that dependence, glorifies God more than if you just magically felt calm all the time. If you face constant opposition for your faith and you keep going, that perseverance is not just your grit, it's God's strength manifesting through your weakness. The fourth lesson is about humility. Paul's thorn was specifically given to keep him from pride. Our struggles can do the same for us. They remind us that we are human. They remind us that we are not in control. They remind us that we desperately need God. When things are going well, it's easy to get complacent, to think we're doing it all ourselves. But when we're facing a persistent thorn, it strips away our self-reliance and fosters a deep, abiding humility. And humility is a fertile ground for God's grace. Finally, the passage reassures us about God's ultimate control, even over the messenger of Satan. Paul understood that even though the thorn came from Satan, it was given to me by God. For God allowed it. God used it for his purposes. This means that even the attacks of the enemy, even the most painful and persistent struggles, are ultimately under God's sovereign hand. He can use them for our good, to refine us, to humble us, and to display his power. This should give us immense comfort. Nothing we face is outside of God's knowledge or his control. And he promises to work all things for the good of those who love him. So Paul's thorn in the flesh remains a mystery in terms of its specific nature. But its purpose and God's response are crystal clear. It was a divine instrument for humility, a platform for grace, and a demonstration of God's perfect strength in human weakness. So God didn't remove the thorn, but he gave Paul himself, and that was more than enough. And that truth applies to us today. Whatever your thorn might be, God's grace is sufficient for you. His strength is made perfect in your weakness. You don't have to pretend to be strong when you're not. You don't have to hide your struggles. Instead, you can bring them to God, pour out your heart, and trust that even if He doesn't take them away, He will give you everything you need to face them. He will be with you in them, and through your weakness, His power will shine. That's a promise for every single one of us.